attempts to urge nuclear weapon states to fulfill their treaty obligations in a verifiable and time-bound manner be dismissed time and again, over and over. It is agonizing to see the humanitarian imperative, which Indonesia has supported wholeheartedly, be reduced to a mere side note when it should be the primary cause that underpins all efforts and effective measures leading towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons. For Indonesia, a rollover outcome is unacceptable, let alone an outcome that regresses beyond our last review conference. At the very least, after 5 years, my delegation expected to see progress with regard to discussions on legal measures leading towards nuclear disarmament, which in our view is a very reasonable path to undertake. Yet, what we see is the same unwillingness by the nuclear weapon states to move away from the status quo, veiled in pseudo-progressive, ambiguous language, which somewhat is reflective of the ominous view that the indefinite extension of the NPT is tantamount to the indefinite possession of nuclear weapons. Indonesia further regrets that progress in the realization of a Middle East zone free from nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, a key piece in ensuring security and stability in the region, remains to be elusive. In this regard, we urge all states parties to redouble their efforts in finding a mutually agreed solution to resolve this critical matter. Madam President, I would like to once again underline the view that much remains to be done in order for the final document to serve the purpose of strengthening the NPT. We have fallen short from our initial commitment 5 years ago, and we have not served justice to the international community outside this building. Indonesia regrets that the review conference was not able to seize the opportunity to make feasible progress in the field of nuclear disarmament, a central objective of the NPT. We call upon all states to not only exercise the necessary political will in the next review cycle, but to also to ensure that future actions and positions do not continue to contradict the object and purpose of the NPT. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Indonesia. And I wish to inform the plenary that in order that we finish our work on time, I have 20 speakers in my list. Then I wish, with the consent of the room, to close the list of speakers, and also, and at the same time, request maybe to shorten a little bit the speeches in order that we can hear all those who are in my list, and to allow also that our proceedings will finish on time, with your indulgence. Having said so, and now I have Austria in my list. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria. Thank you.
I thank you, Madam President. I'm taking the floor on behalf of Afghanistan, Argentina, Brazil, Brunei, Darussalam, Burundi, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Indonesia, Iraq, Ireland, Jamaica, Lebanon, Liberia, Libya, Liechtenstein, Madagascar, Malaysia, Malta, Marshall Islands, Mexico, Nicaragua, Nigeria, Palau, Papua New Guinea, Paraguay, Peru, the Philippines, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Singapore, South Africa, Swaziland, Thailand, Trinidad and Tobago, Uruguay, Venezuela, Vietnam, and my own country, Austria. Madam President, thank you first of all for you and the entire Bureau's hard work to try to achieve an outcome for this review conference. We entered the conference in a constructive spirit and based on a strong position, backed not only by evidence on the consequences and risks of nuclear weapons, gathered over this review cycle, but also by an overwhelming majority of 159 countries. We wanted to enter into negotiations and try to deliver real and credible progress towards a world without nuclear weapons, based on a heightened sense of urgency that we all share. We regarded it as our responsibility to present this compelling evidence to this conference, as it should be at the center of all deliberations, obligations and commitments with regard to nuclear disarmament. We strived for a result that would not only be acceptable to all, but that would actually advance the objectives of the treaty and strengthen the treaty itself. The collective membership of the treaty unfortunately did not achieve these objectives at this conference. We remain committed to the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime established by the NPT. We will continue to fulfill and implement all our obligations and commitments contained in the treaty and established by the review process. Madam President, at this conference we have witnessed a clear shifting of the parameters, the focus, the tone and the balance of the discussion and the engagement of all countries of the Treaty on Nuclear Weapons. Non-nuclear weapon states are today more empowered to demand their security concerns be taken into consideration on an equal basis. Madam President, it is in the interest of the very survival of humanity that nuclear weapons are never used again under any circumstances. The only absolute guarantee against the threat posed by nuclear weapons is their prohibition and their total elimination. Although the nuclear weapon states bear the ultimate responsibility to completely eliminate their nuclear arsenals, it is a shared responsibility by all states to prevent the humanitarian impact and effects related to these weapons of mass destruction. The exchanges of views that we have witnessed during this review cycle demonstrate that there is a wide divide that presents itself in many fundamental aspects of what nuclear disarmament should mean. There is a reality gap, a credibility gap, a confidence gap, and a moral gap. After the discussions of the past weeks, we are now even more concerned about the existence of nuclear weapons and the apparent attempts to brush aside the facts, impacts, and risks of nuclear weapons. Even the document that you put before us shows the urgency to act upon the unacceptable humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, but then falls dramatically short of making credible progress on filling the legal gap in what should have been the forward-looking part. And we, of course, regret that the conference was not able to achieve a consensus outcome. Madam President, we call on all states parties of the NPT to renew their commitment to the urgent and full implementation of existing obligations under Article 6, and to this end, to identify and pursue effective measures to fill the legal gap for the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons, and we pledge to cooperate to achieve this goal. We pledge to cooperate with all relevant stakeholders, states, international organizations, the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movements, parliamentarians, and civil society in efforts to stigmatize, prohibit, and eliminate nuclear weapons in light of their unacceptable humanitarian consequences and associated risks. Madam President, the discussions of the past weeks, the fact that credible progress could not be achieved, and the humanitarian imperative only underscore that we must continue with urgency in our efforts. Can I ask you please that this statement be placed on the official record? And if I can add in my national capacity the following information. I also have the honor to inform you that the humanitarian pledge presented by Austria at the Vienna Conference on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons has reached a level of support that we not believed possible when we issued it in Vienna. The more the disarmament discussions have lost credibility and the urgent sense of direction during the past weeks the delegations had hoped for, the more states expressed formally their endorsement of the humanitarian pledge, and the number of countries that have endorsed this pledge has now reached 107. Thank you so much, Madam President.
Thank you, Alexander, for your kind words. The next 4 speakers in my list are the Philippines, Australia, Costa Rica, Algeria. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Philippines.
Thank you, Madam President. We thank you, Madam President, for your tireless and patient efforts to get us to this day, confident that we could go through the process of looking back and strengthening our efforts to find ways to fully realize the objectives of the treaty. The Philippines joins those who are extremely grateful to you for taking on this challenging task. We also extend our appreciation to your team, to the Bureau, and to the Secretariat. Madam President, we came here with a few expectations, but with much conviction. Considering that the political conditions now are markedly different from that of 5 years ago, we also came armed with realistic goals. Of the 64 actions that we agreed to in 2010, we focused on 3 specific issues: the campaign on the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons that could strengthen the NPT, the push for effective measures on nuclear disarmament that we must immediately put in place, and the resolution of the failure to convene the Conference on the Middle East in 2012. We believed that all 3, if addressed and appropriately reflected in our outcome document, would help maintain the credibility of the NPT, which we helped bolster 5 years ago. It is therefore with deep regret that we still cannot agree on terms to convene the Middle East Conference at the soonest possible time. We are seriously concerned about how this issue will continue to affect all disarmament discussions moving forward, and this treaty in particular. Madam President, we have consistently called for the balanced treatment of all three pillars of the treaty. It is also with deep regret and disappointment that the sections in the draft outcome document on nuclear disarmament have suffered a major step back from our gains in 2010. There is nothing in the outcome document that lays down the concrete path towards the achievement of Article 6. Paragraph 154.19 of the draft outcome document recommends an open-ended working group to identify and elaborate effective measures for the full implementation of Article 6. Yet, it does not say how the work of this group will feed into the treaty. Madam President, the Philippines will continue to engage and exert all effort to build on the gains we achieved in 2010. Together with many like-minded states, we will continue to state the strong case for the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons and tirelessly call for the start of a process, be it on a nuclear weapons convention or on a ban treaty, that will fill the legal gap for the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for your kind words. I please seek your indulgence in order that you shorten a little bit your speeches, otherwise there is no possibility for those who are in my list to speak. Having said so, I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll heed your call to be brief at this late hour. Let me first thank you for your tireless and sustained efforts, and those of other Bureau members, the Secretary General of the Conference, the Secretariat and your team, seeking to bridge the gaps and achieve a good result at this review conference. We very much regret that it's not been possible to reach consensus on our draft substantial outcomes document. Intensive efforts have been made by many delegations, including my own and our partners in the Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Initiative, to achieve a successful and forward-looking review conference outcome across the three pillars of the NPT: disarmament, non-proliferation and peaceful uses of nuclear energy. These efforts are reflected in our extensive draft outcomes document. It is thus particularly disappointing that consensus could not be achieved on the key issue of the proposed conference on the Middle East as a zone free from all weapons of mass destruction. Australia continues to believe that this process must be inclusive and consensus-based. In conclusion, at this difficult time, we must all seek to reaffirm the fundamental importance of the NPT as a cornerstone of global peace and security. We must also continue to do all we can to protect and promote the NPT's salience and authority. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your kind words. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Costa Rica.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Al iniciar esta conferencia de examen, Costa Rica le expresó su compromiso de trabajar sin descanso y constructivamente en este proceso, y así lo hemos hecho. Para nuestro país, esta conferencia de examen debió haber sido más que una gota en el mar. Debió constituir un verdadero punto de inflexión, una oportunidad dorada para otorgarle un nuevo ímpetu al desarme nuclear. Durante los últimos 5 años, la iniciativa humanitaria ha logrado colocar a la seguridad humana como un bien público global, un bien que no se erige sobre la fuerza ni sobre el paradigma desactualizado de la disuasión que mantiene a más de 16.000 ojivas nucleares en el mundo, cientos de ellas en alto estado de alerta. Costa Rica ha abogado por la prohibición y eliminación completa de las armas nucleares, porque creemos que van en contra del instinto de supervivencia de cualquier especie. Sin embargo, nos falta mucho por hacer. En el tanto no se honren siquiera los acuerdos existentes y solo algunas obligaciones sean selectivamente cumplidas, pero no todas. En el tanto existan países que se resistan a ratificar el TNP y el Tratado de Prohibición Completa de los Ensayos Nucleares. En el tanto la conferencia de examen siga paralizada. En el tanto algunos escondan información de seguridad relevante, almacenen material fisible y rechacen los mecanismos de verificación internacional escudados tras el amparo de su soberanía. En tanto se continúen realizando ensayos nucleares, siga en marcha la modernización de las armas nucleares y la proliferación vertical y horizontal. En el tanto continuemos con el enfoque paso a paso. En el tanto se siga postergando la celebración de la Conferencia Internacional sobre el Establecimiento en el Medio Oriente de una zona libre de armas nucleares y otras armas de destrucción masiva. El desarme nuclear seguirá siendo para nosotros un objetivo distante y para los ciudadanos del mundo una esperanza lejana. Los más importantes logros alcanzados durante el presente ciclo de examen son Oslo, Nayarit y Viena. Son prueba fehaciente que la democracia ha llegado al desarme nuclear, aunque la democracia no haya llegado al TNP. Demuestran que existe un sentido creciente y poderoso de urgencia para librar al mundo de una vez por todas de esta amenaza innecesaria que nos roba nuestra seguridad en lugar de proveerla. Así como la comunidad internacional ha emprendido esfuerzos para luchar contra las armas nucleares, Muchos se han adaptado a ellas y pragmáticamente han aceptado que la sombrilla nuclear es parte de la vida. Aceptar esa falacia está en contra de los principios fundamentales de los costarricenses. Por ello, al finalizar esta conferencia de examen tenemos dos opciones. Podemos mantener nuestro curso y esperar sencillamente que ninguna catástrofe sobrevenga sobre nosotros, o podemos intentar alcanzar un verdadero cambio. Costa Rica se inclina por la segunda opción. Debemos intentar un verdadero cambio. La promesa humanitaria es el resultado tangible de esta conferencia de examen. Costa Rica le da la bienvenida y al reconocimiento de que existe en efecto un vacío legal en torno a las armas nucleares. Costa Rica llama a más estados a endosar la promesa humanitaria y a unir esfuerzos para llenar ese vacío legal al perseguir medidas que estigmatizarían, prohibirán y finalmente conducirán a la eliminación de todas las armas nucleares. Señora Presidenta, a pesar de lo que aconteció en esta conferencia de examen, ninguna fuerza puede detener la marcha segura de aquellos que creemos en la seguridad humana, la democracia y el derecho internacional. La historia solo honra a los valientes, a quienes tienen las agallas de pensar diferente e incluso soñar con un futuro mejor para todos. No es hora de lamentarnos por lo que pasó aquí, tan lamentable como haya sido. Es hora de trabajar por lo que vendrá, por el mundo que queremos y merecemos. Démosle todos, finalmente y con hidalguía, una oportunidad a la paz. Muchas gracias, señora Presidenta.
Muchas gracias por su palabra, señora. Y ahora doy la palabra al excelentísimo embajador de Argelia.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me first of all, obviously, I say that I align myself with the statements made by Iran on behalf of the non-aligned and Tunisia on behalf of the Arab group. Madam President, we have reached the final moments of this review conference, not on the outcome we have strived for. I want to say that you and we have tried every humanly possible efforts exerted individually and within the various regional groups to advance the cause of the NPT and a balanced and well sought after approach on its three pillars. I have to state for the record that we have come a long and strenuous way for a consensus document, even though I must state it, the draft final document was in no manner satisfactory to us, but we accepted, we agreed and supported it at the end. The meaning of negotiations to us: you don't get all what you want, but you have to reach a compromise, acceptable, feasible, and in bona fide. I have to say, unfortunately, dismay, disappointment, dissatisfaction will seem to be rhyming with disarmament. The success of the conference would have been the success of all member states and the cause of non-proliferation and disarmament. The failure, if any, would be the failure of all of us, everyone, and that would, I say, would be a very bad omen. Algeria, who has embarked upon the acceptance of the helm of this conference, through your dedicated leadership, knew beforehand all the difficulties. But my country accepted the challenge, betting on the strong commitment expressed by all prior to the holding of the conference. All efforts made by everyone involved did not pay off, unfortunately. And let's say it clearly, that we should look twice in the future with what should be done to have a document. Let's put it bluntly also. If something dear to many is not satisfactory to few, then why those many will not reopen the Pandora box? It will be a lose-lose situation. It is sad and regrettable that the 1995 resolution on the Middle East, adopted unanimously, and let's remind ourselves as a part of a package that included the indefinite extension of the treaty, is doomed to uncalled for and unending obstacles. We're yet to be convinced by this rationale. Let me say it very clearly that Algeria will stick faithfully to its commitment to NPT and the cause of nuclear disarmament, and will continue steadily to work and to act within all appropriate fora to have this conference convened as soon as possible. Commitment of all to NPT, and especially of the nuclear weapon states, are not negotiable. It is a commitment to peace. They have to deliver, and we have to deliver. In the name of our public opinion, for our constituency, and for the sake of peace. It is high time to say, and it is time to say rightfully, in this kind of situation, that we have to speak up, including with our close friends and partners. We have to tell the truth, and to tell them when they are on the wrong side of the track. And in this case, we say it in all forcefulness, candidness, and sincerity. They are not on the right track. No blame whatsoever, and to no one, but disappointment with the way after all these trying times. Let me thank you, Madam President, and your Secretariat for the tremendous efforts and your strong guidance and leadership to reach an overall agreement. History will record that every human effort was made in often adverse and tense conditions. You overcame all that, and I do thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabri. I am very touched by your very kind words. Thank you again. Having said that, I will maybe announce the 4 next speakers in my list. I have Syria, Brazil, Germany, Russian Federation. Then I give the floor now to the distinguished representative of Syria. You have the floor.
شكرا سيدة الرئيسة. السيدة الرئيسة، يود وفد الجمهورية العربية السورية أن يتقدم لكم بخالص الشكر والتقدير على جهودكم الصادقة التي بذلتموها خلال الأسابيع الماضية للتوصل بنا إلى وثيقة تحظى بتوافق الآراء. كما نتوجه بالشكر لفريقكم ولرؤساء اللجان الرئيسية الثلاث والهيئات الفرعية المنبثقة عنها ولأمانة المؤتمر على جهودهم. السيدة الرئيسة، يعبر وفد بلادي عن شديد الأسف لحقيقة واضحة في هذه اللحظة للجميع، وهي أن دولا تعتبر نفسها وصية وراعية لمعاهدة منع الانتشار تأخذ على عاتقها وأمامنا جميعا وأمام الرأي العالمي إفشال مؤتمرنا هذا الذي سعت فيه كل الدول الأطراف للتوافق. هذا الفشل يأتي فقط من أجل حماية كيان يعتبر في حالة انتهاك فاضحة لكل أحكام المعاهدة، حتى أن تلك الدول التي اعترضت على التوافق لم تتلفظ قط بدعوة إسرائيل للانضمام للمعاهدة كطرف غير نووي ووضع منشآتها النووية تحت الضمانات الشاملة للوكالة الدولية للطاقة الذرية. إن ما حصل اليوم يذكرنا بأمثلة كثيرة شهدناها في مجلس الأمن استخدمت فيها كل من الولايات المتحدة وبريطانيا، والذي من المفترض أنهما راعيتان للسلم والأمن الدوليين، استخدمتا حق امتياز النقد لحماية انتهاكات إسرائيل لكل قوانين الشرعية الدولية، تلك الانتهاكات التي لم تتوقف منذ عقود وحتى هذه اللحظة. Madam President, the vast majority of the NPT membership and throughout the past 4 weeks of our work called on Israel, the only country in the Middle East in flagrant position of a military nuclear arsenal, to join the NPT immediately and without any preconditions, and to put all its nuclear facilities under the supervision of the IAEA safeguards. Yet 2 depository states, along with Canada, are willing to turn an eternal blind spot to that existential Israeli nuclear threat. It should not come as a surprise to us that Israel is adamant in refusing to join the NPT. Israel is already represented in the NPT through the presence of states like Canada, United Kingdom, and the United States, who rush to devotedly defend the rights of Israel in possessing nuclear weapons that represent a clear threat to international peace and security. We do not think, Madam President, that Israel will better represent its own interests than those above-mentioned countries prove to do every time and in every venue. السيدة الرئيسة، سيبقى وفد الجمهورية العربية السورية يسعى دائما مع باقي الدول الأطراف الصادقة في سعيها من أجل التوصل لتحقيق أهداف المعاهدة وعالميتها، ويؤكد على التزامه الكامل بأحكامها. قد تكون نتيجة مؤتمرنا هذا انتكاسة، إلا أنها وبالتأكيد انتكاسة لن تؤثر على عزيمتنا الجماعية في مواصلة الجهود الحثيثة لتحقيق عالم خال من الأسلحة النووية ومن تهديدها. وشكرا جزيلا السيدة الرئيسة.
شكرا جزيلا لممثل الموقر لجمهورية العربية السورية على كلمته. أما الآن أعطي الكلمة لممثل الموقر لبرازيل.
Thank you, Madam President. Brazil fully associates itself with the statement made by this distinguished representative of Austria, Ambassador Alexander Clement. Brazil would like to express its most sincere appreciation for the tireless efforts that you, Madam President, have made throughout this conference to lead us to a positive outcome. Brazil deeply regrets that despite those efforts, this conference was not able to agree on a final document. We worked constructively throughout the negotiations to achieve a consensus outcome. Since we received the President's text early today, we reviewed it very carefully. In our assessment, after a comprehensive evaluation of the text, Brazil concluded that despite its shortcomings, especially in the area of disarmament, the overall balance was positive. So we were ready to support a consensus on its adoption. We regret that differences on the convening of a conference on the establishment of a Middle East zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction could not be resolved. Brazil remains fully committed to the implementation of all objectives of the treaty and the commitments undertaken in its review process. To that end, we will continue to engage constructively in the relevant international fora to achieve our shared goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your kind words. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Germany deeply regrets that it was not possible to reach consensus on a final document of this review conference. This, indeed, is a very sad moment for the NPT. On a Middle East zone free of weapons of mass destruction, we would have wished for the continuation of an inclusive process contributing to the security in the region. Germany regrets that the progress achieved so far is now endangered. Compromise is a difficult thing to arrive at. It demands concessions from all sides. Germany, together with many partners from the EU, the NPTI and other groups, has tried to provide elements for possible compromises. We will continue our efforts to bridge the gap between opposing views in all three pillars of the NPT. Germany is convinced that it needs the joint efforts of all NPT states parties to fill this treaty with life and to deliver on the undertakings of the treaty itself and of the decisions by previous review conferences. We all aim at a common goal, a world free of nuclear weapons. The past 4 weeks have shown the strong commitment to this goal by all states parties. We had lively debates about the path towards that common goal. While we may not all share the same view about the best, most practicable or fastest way toward our common goal, we should be united in reaffirming our undiminished commitment to the NPT as the bedrock of our common endeavor. Still, Even without setting new goals for the coming review cycle, the challenges remain. Many of the actions agreed on at the past review conferences still await implementation. Therefore, this is the moment for continued and strengthened efforts by all of us, the states parties of the NPT, to fulfill the commitments made. Germany stands ready to engage and will continue to be active in different fora in order to achieve progress on the path towards a world free of nuclear weapons. Finally, Germany would like to thank you, Madam President, the chairs of the main committees and the subsidiary bodies, and your teams for your dedication and tireless efforts. Your job was a difficult one from the very outset, and your stamina made certain that no possibility was left out to try and achieve consensus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam, for your kind words. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель. Хотел бы выразить вам и всем должностным лицам конференции, секретариату, глубокую признательность за умелую организацию нашей работы. За 4 недели мы провели детальное, всестороннее рассмотрение действия ДНЯО. Это позволило оценить положение дел в сфере ядерного разоружения, ядерного нераспространения и мирного использования атомной энергии. Такой всесторонний обзор подтвердил, что договор является одной из краеугольных опор международной безопасности и стабильности. Он отвечает интересам всех государств-участников, ядерных и неядерных, больших и малых. Благодарю вас, госпожа председатель, за подготовку проекта итогового документа. Мы были готовы присоединиться к консенсусному одобрению этого документа. Хотя, признаюсь, у нас были замечания по отдельным его положениям, мы считали важным его принять в интересах укрепления режима ядерного нераспространения. Жаль, что этого не получилось. Позвольте особо остановиться на ближневосточной проблематике, поскольку Россия в силу своего статуса в рамках ДНЯО имеет к этому самое непосредственное отношение. Россия со всей серьезностью восприняла поручение предыдущей обзорной конференции о созыве в 2012 году конференции по созданию на Ближнем Востоке зоны, свободные от ядерного и других видов оружия массового уничтожения. Как, я думаю, все знают, не наша вина в том, что эта конференция не состоялась в назначенные сроки. Тем не менее, мы неизменно продолжали прилагать максимум усилий для того, чтобы этот форум состоялся как можно скорее. И мы очень рассчитывали, что именно на данной обзорной конференции нам удастся найти такое решение, которое позволило бы созвать конференцию не позже 1 марта 2016 года. На наш взгляд, такие временные рамки давали хорошее основание рассчитывать на основательную подготовку и успешное проведение этого мероприятия с участием, как мы рассчитывали, всех стран Ближневосточного региона. Свое видение того, как следовало бы организовать работу по подготовке конференции и последующий процесс, мы изложили неделю с лишним назад в своем рабочем документе. Признательны всем тем делегациям, которые дали нашим предложениям высокие оценки. Хотели бы особо выразить признательность делегации Египта за теплые слова в наш адрес и за лидерство в вопросе создания зоны, свободной от АМУ на Ближнем Востоке. Мы крайне огорчены, что принятие итогового документа, включая его раздел по Ближнему Востоку, оказалось невозможным из-за возражений 3 государств. Причем 2 из этих государств являются соавторами резолюции 1995 года по Ближнему Востоку, нашими соавторами. Это крайне странно и прискорбно. Убедительных объяснений причин такого решения мы, к сожалению, не услышали. По нашему убеждению, ваш проект, госпожа председатель, отвечал интересам всех, без исключения государств региона. И, что особенно важно, он был ориентирован на продуктивный диалог. Жаль, что возможность такого диалога оказалась упущенной, возможно, надолго. Тем не менее, резолюция 1995 года остается в силе, и она будет оставаться в силе до полного осуществления. Россия готова продолжать содействовать ее претворению в жизнь. Спасибо.
Thank you, Mikhail, for your kind words. Now, the next 4 speakers in my list are Cuba, China, Myanmar, Thailand. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Tras 5 años de espera, esta conferencia de examen tuvo la oportunidad de marcar un punto de viraje histórico y lograr progresos reales hacia un mundo libre de armas nucleares. Esa oportunidad fue desaprovechada. Al momento de adherirse al tratado, el 4 de noviembre del año 2002, Cuba dejó registrada una declaración de principios enfatizando que las doctrinas militares sustentadas en la posesión de armas nucleares son insostenibles e inaceptables y que a ningún país o grupo de países debe permitírsele el monopolio de las armas nucleares ni su desarrollo cuantitativo y cualitativo. Igualmente, esa declaración del gobierno cubano afirma que la única manera de superar los vicios de origen del TNP y su esencia selectiva y discriminatoria es cumpliendo el objetivo de la eliminación total de las armas nucleares. El logro del desarme nuclear ha sido y continuará siendo una prioridad para Cuba. Sobre esa base, nuestra delegación ha participado de manera activa y constructiva en esta conferencia. Ahora nos corresponde a todos y cada uno de los Estados partes evaluar a fondo, de manera honesta y sosegada, las consecuencias e implicaciones que tiene para la relevancia y credibilidad futura del tratado lo ocurrido en esta conferencia, que concluye sin resultado alguno tras la decisión anunciada por 3 delegaciones de objetar formalmente el proyecto de documento final. Por otro lado, nadie ignora que incluso de haberse adoptado el documento final, su acápite sobre desarme nuclear estaría muy lejos de satisfacer las expectativas de la inmensa mayoría de los Estados partes debido a la falta de voluntad política de unos pocos Estados. Estas realidades, señora presidenta, deberán ser tenidas en cuenta en los futuros análisis sobre lo que en esta conferencia ha ocurrido. Cuba comparte la frustración de los Estados que no poseen armas nucleares por la falta de avances en materia de desarme nuclear y por el incumplimiento permanente de la resolución de 1995 sobre Medio Oriente. No debe sorprender a nadie que una mayoría creciente de Estados partes esté cada vez más convencida de que el TNP no es en realidad su tratado, sino únicamente el de los Estados poseedores de armas nucleares. Eso no ayuda absolutamente a nadie. Durante esta conferencia se constataron una vez más las diferencias entre el discurso y la práctica. Quedaron bien evidenciadas las posiciones de cada Estado y los compromisos reales que, más allá de la retórica, está dispuesto a asumir en la realidad cada uno de nosotros. No es justo ni aceptable que un grupo de Estados partes cumplamos estrictamente con todas nuestras obligaciones en virtud del TNP y que otros no actúen de la misma manera. Señora Presidenta, con sus infatigables gestiones, su permanente optimismo y su profesionalismo diplomático, usted y su talentoso equipo de trabajo se han ganado el aprecio y el reconocimiento de la delegación cubana. Usted y su equipo pueden estar satisfechos por el excelente trabajo que han realizado. Hacemos extensivos esos agradecimientos a los presidentes de los comités y los órganos subsidiarios y a todo el personal de la Secretaría por su labor. Concluyo enfatizando, señora Presidenta, que si bien no podemos cambiar la historia, sí podemos cambiar el futuro. La razón está de nuestro lado. No tenemos derecho al desánimo. La humanidad continúa en grave riesgo de ser aniquilada por la existencia de más de 16.000 armas nucleares, 4.000 de ellas listas para ser utilizadas de inmediato. El empleo de una parte ínfima de ellas tendrá consecuencias catastróficas para nuestro planeta. Ningún país quedaría inmune a la insensatez de un ataque nuclear. Es por ello, señora Presidenta, que continuaremos batallando sin descanso para hacer realidad más temprano que tarde el mundo mejor, libre de armas nucleares, que necesitan y merecen las futuras generaciones. Muchas gracias, señora Presidenta.
Muchísimas gracias por sus muy amables palabras. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
谢谢主席。主席女士，中国代表团对您为推动本次审议大会取得成果。中国代表团对您为推动本次审议大会取得成果所做的不懈努力表示衷心感谢。您平和而坚定的风格以及卓越的外交才干，给我们留下了深刻印象。我们也对各主要委员会、各附属机构主席所做的重要努力表示赞赏与感谢。中方对审议大会未能通过最后文件深表遗憾。尽管最后文件在一些问题上不能完全令人满意，但仍不失为一个相对平衡、可为中方所接受的文件。在建立中东无核及其他大规模杀伤性武器区国际会议问题上，中方认为主席有关案文已尽可能平衡地照顾了各方的关切，有助于推动该国际会议尽早举行。中方对此完全支持。主席女士，会议虽然未能达成协商一致的成果文件，但这不应影响我们对条约的信心。 条约仍是国际核不扩散体系的基石，仍将在国际安全格局中发挥重要作用。公约的缔约国仍有义务维护和加强条约的有效性、权威性和普遍性，仍有义务全面平衡推进作为条约3大支柱的核裁军、核不扩散、和平利用核能的国际努力。中方愿与各方一道，在下一轮审议周期内，共同推进不扩散核武器条约审计进程，为实现一个更加安全的世界做出自己的努力。谢谢主席女士。
I thank the Ambassador of China for his kind words, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Myanmar.
Madam President, I am taking the floor on behalf of 10 member states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, namely Brunei Darussalam, Cambodia, Indonesia, the Lao People's Democratic Republic, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and my own country, Myanmar. Madam President, at the opening of the review conference, I had the honor to deliver a statement on behalf of ASEAN, in which we expressed our hope that this review conference would pave the way for states parties to produce a clear and balanced roadmap. We knew then that it will be challenging to reach a substantive outcome document. ASEAN had hoped to strengthen the implementation of the treaty and conclude at an outcome document which built upon the consensus reached at the 2010 review conference. Madam President, during the past few weeks of deliberation, ASEAN had engaged constructively both at the formal and informal meetings of the review conference on a number of important priorities for our member states. For ASEAN, the three pillars of the NPT are equally important and reinforced one another. ASEAN has consistently engaged constructively and actively in various forums on efforts to promote nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and the peaceful use of nuclear energy in support of the principles and objectives of the NPT. As ASEAN will become a community by the end of this year, we attach importance to the development of nuclear energy for peaceful uses, including on peaceful applications of nuclear energy in support of the post-2015 development agenda, as well as the formation of the network of ASEAN nuclear regulatory bodies, or ASEAN-TOM. Madam President, you may recall during the general debate as well as the subsequent meetings held in Main Committee 1 and Subsidiary Body 1, we presented our views on the importance and relevance of the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons and the potential of the issue to strengthen NPT's nuclear disarmament obligations, consistent with Article 6. In our view, ASEAN, as well as an overwhelming majority of the state parties, expressed our strong desire for the humanitarian consequences to be treated fairly throughout the 2015 NPT review conference, with the aim that it will be reflected in an adequate, forward-looking, and result-oriented manner in the outcome document of this conference. We had also engaged constructively on the text with respect to nuclear weapon-free zones and had agreed with other concerned delegations, including the nuclear weapon states, in our consultations on a number of paragraphs. To our surprise and disappointment, those agreed paras were not incorporated in the text before us. Madam President, ASEAN expressed our deep appreciation to the President and her Bureau as well as the chairs of the main committee and subsidiary bodies for their maximum efforts exerted during this review conference. We do at the same time express our concern with the conduct of the conference, which could have been more transparent and involved the larger membership in support of finding a more balanced document based on consensus. We were also disappointed from the point of view of many of our small delegations which felt excluded from a number of closed-door negotiations and parallel meetings. Madam President, substantively, it is deeply regrettable that state parties were simply unable to come together to strengthen our efforts on all three pillars of the NPT. In particular, it is deeply regrettable that there was a clear lack of progress on nuclear disarmament, and in particular that we failed to take advantage of the opportunity that humanitarian initiative provided to make substantive and meaningful advancement on nuclear disarmament. Madam President, it is our hope that those efforts will not end here at this conference, and that we will have an opportunity at the next review conference to reflect more adequately on this important movement. Additionally, on those paragraphs of paramount importance to ASEAN on the issue of nuclear weapon-free zone, we also deeply regret the fact that negotiated and agreed text was simply disregarded. Despite great effort made by state parties, we regret to see that this review conference was not able to come to consensus. However, ASEAN reaffirms our commitment to the principles and objectives of this treaty and will redouble our efforts to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons. Many of our ASEAN member states have now formally endorsed the humanitarian pledge, and we look forward to future opportunities to work with other countries in our region and beyond on action-oriented and forward-looking initiatives in the area of nuclear disarmament. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I wish just to clarify something, because I was alerted regarding this, the paragraph related to the zones in your region. I checked with the Secretariat, and it seems that there was no clear picture regarding the agreement reached regarding the subject matter that you are referring to. Then maybe I invite you later to be in touch with the Secretariat and to check again. These are the notes I received, because really I tried to check, and this is the situation I have so far. I encourage you maybe to be in touch with the Secretariat later. And having said so, I will also encourage delegations please to have more short speeches if possible, because I still have 14 speakers in my list. Then I hope we can finish on time. Otherwise it will be not possible, simply. Alors, now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Thailand.
Madam President, thank you for giving me the floor. Allow me first to align myself with the statement just delivered by the distinguished permanent representative of Myanmar on behalf of ASEAN. We also associate ourselves with the statement delivered by the Ambassador of Austria on behalf of a large number of countries behind the humanitarian pledge. Madam President, my delegation would like to express our appreciation to you, your Bureau, the hardworking chairs of the main committees and subsidiary bodies, and the Secretariat for all of their efforts during this 2015 NPT review conference. Madam President, the lack of consensus on an outcome document must be a somber reminder for states parties that we are not doing enough. Every 5 years, states parties must come together to take stock, review implementation of the treaty, and strengthen it. At one level, we may have indeed succeeded, but succeeded in merely engaging in debate. But on nuclear disarmament in particular, we have clearly missed the mark. My delegation views that the humanitarian initiative represented at this review conference a moment of clarity for an overwhelming majority of non-nuclear weapon states that the responsibility to disarm rests on both nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states alike. Unfortunately, even if consensus on the document had not been blocked, we felt that states parties were not able to take full advantage of the opportunity to take on that responsibility here. Unfortunately, we were unable to commit to beginning a process to negotiate a legally binding instrument that would have taken us substantially further in actually realizing a world free of nuclear weapons. We deeply regret this shortcoming. Madam President, Thailand recognizes that all states parties exerted their maximum efforts in consultations held during the past few weeks. At the same time, we would have appreciated if those consultations embraced a larger portion of the membership, especially at critical moments in discussions on the text. We were also concerned at the practice of disregarding agreed paragraphs consulted by all concerned states parties in the text presented at the beginning of this meeting, and hope that this will not set a precedent. We will surely be in touch with the Secretariat, as you suggested, Madam President, to ensure that our concerns were understood. Allow me to conclude, Madam President, by reaffirming our commitment to the treaty and our efforts on all three pillars of the NPT. On nuclear disarmament in particular, we regret the inability of the conference to bring us closer to agreement on this important issue, but we commit to continue working with those within and beyond our region, both civil society and states, for concrete progress in this regard. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore. Before I give you the floor, I'm sorry, I will just announce the four next speakers, then Singapore, Ireland, Peru, and Republic of Korea. Then Singapore, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Singapore would like to express our appreciation to you and the Bureau, as well as the chairs of the main committees and subsidiary bodies, for the tireless efforts in the lead-up and during the course of this NPT review conference. Madam President, Singapore regrets that we have been unable to find common ground to achieve a consensus outcome at this review conference. We are disappointed that the conference has been unable to strengthen the relevance and credibility of the treaty. On the issue of nuclear disarmament, as long as some countries continue to have nuclear weapons and others do not, the imbalance will engender a sense of insecurity and distrust. The humanitarian dimension of the impact of nuclear weapons has been an important part of our discussions at this review conference. As highlighted by our Austrian colleague, Singapore has endorsed the humanitarian pledge. We call for greater commitment by states parties to uphold the NPT, in particular Article 6, to eliminate the risk posed by nuclear weapons to mankind. Madam President, the establishment of nuclear weapon-free zones is a concrete step under the NPT that contributes towards global peace and security. In this respect, while we were unable to achieve consensus on a final outcome document, we reiterate our calls for an inclusive conference on the establishment of a Middle East zone free of nuclear weapons and all other weapons of mass destruction to take place as soon as possible. As highlighted in the statement delivered by the distinguished Ambassador of Myanmar on behalf of ASEAN, Singapore, together with other ASEAN member states, has engaged constructively in discussions at this conference on the issue of nuclear weapon-free zones. Consensus was achieved among concerned delegations on a number of paragraphs and presented to the chair of Main Committee 2. We therefore deeply regret that paragraphs that were negotiated and agreed by consensus were not reflected in the text in front of us, in particular on paragraph 157 of NPT/Conf 2015 R3, we would like to put on record the consensus text, which reads, and I quote, "The conference welcomes the progress towards ratification by the nuclear weapon states of the relevant protocols to nuclear weapon-free zone treaties. The conference notes that ongoing efforts of states parties to the Treaty on the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone, Bangkok Treaty, and the nuclear weapon states pertaining to the signing and ratification of the protocol to that treaty. The conference welcomes the signature and ratification by nuclear weapon states of the protocol to the Treaty on a Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone in Central Asia. End of quote. We appreciate your early response to Myanmar on this matter and your willingness to clarify it separately, but would nevertheless like to request that this statement be reflected in the official records of this conference. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland.
Thank you, Madam President. Article 6 of this treaty imposes upon each state party an obligation to enter into and conclude good faith negotiations that would produce agreed legally binding measures placing the process of nuclear disarmament under strict and effective international control. Ireland's work at this conference has been guided by this. Today, 80% of the NPT membership, an overwhelming majority, subscribes to the position that nuclear weapons must never be used again under any circumstances, and that the only way to guarantee this is through their total elimination. There has recently been a further development in the form of the humanitarian pledge mentioned by Austria, through which, as of this week, a clear majority of the NPT membership has undertaken to progress towards effective measures to fill the legal gap in Article 6. The humanitarian impact discussion has produced new information and awareness about the risks associated with the possession of nuclear weapons and the consequences for all, especially women and girls, that would flow from any detonation. These risks and consequences have asked very serious questions of the international rule of law on nuclear weapons and what this means for the safety of our citizens. It is a matter of profound regret that this conference could not begin to answer those questions. The level of support enjoyed by the humanitarian impacts discussion, including among a growing number of civil society organisations, international organisations, including the ICRC, demonstrates beyond any doubt that the parameters of our discussion on nuclear disarmament has changed forever. That is the new reality. The New Agenda Coalition has started mapping out possible ways to achieve effective measures for nuclear disarmament. Further work in this regard will be an urgent priority for Ireland in the coming period. It was from the 2013 OEWG, established by the General Assembly at its 67th session, that a NAC paper submitted by Egypt first explored the essential elements of an instrument to fulfill Article 6. This was developed by the NAC through two subsequent working papers, the latest of which was submitted by New Zealand to this conference. Ireland believes that serious efforts to identify and pursue effective measures for the implementation of Article 6 are required as a matter of urgency. It seems clear to most that to be effective, these measures would require to be legally binding. As the NPT approaches 50, work to achieve this must, in our view, begin immediately. Madam Chair, it's a matter of particular regret for my delegation that this conference has not been in a position to make progress towards long overdue and much needed implementation of the 1995 resolution on the Middle East. We wish to record our particular gratitude to the Government of Finland and to Ambassador Jaakko Laajava of Finland for his unstinting efforts since 2011, and hope that progress will be made in the near future. For now, it is time for reflection and we hope re-engagement. In closing, Madam Chair, last but very far from least, Ireland would like to thank you for your hugely committed personal efforts and consummate professionalism throughout this review conference in your extensive consultations with states parties. My delegation would also wish to express its warm appreciation for the tireless efforts of all the chairs of the main committees, of the subsidiary bodies, and also the staff of the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the kind words. I really urge the next speakers to be as short as possible. Otherwise, you cannot even adopt the report of the conference, then please I urge you all to shorten your speeches, please. Alors, the next speaker is the distinguished representative of Peru. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Excelencia, distinguidos delegados, amigos todos. En mi calidad de Past President de la tercera comisión preparatoria, así como de la comisión principal 1 de esta conferencia de examen del 2015 del Tratado para la no proliferación de las armas nucleares, quiero manifestar públicamente mi personal reconocimiento al movimiento de países no alineados por haber confiado en mí para presidir los trabajos de esta reunión de Estados partes en ambas ocasiones. En segundo lugar, quiero agradecer al gobierno de mi país, al gobierno del Perú, por haberme permitido y también confiado en mí para cumplir con este honroso encargo. Debo resaltar mi especial agradecimiento a todos ustedes, las distinguidas delegaciones participantes, por su permanente aliciente y respaldo a mi gestión, lo que me permitió un mejor desempeño en la misión con el pleno convencimiento que lo he cumplido en homenaje a lo que siempre les prometí, es decir, tratar de ser un buen negociador diplomático, un constructor de puentes para acercar posiciones y un intermediario honesto para alcanzar el fin que todos buscamos, es decir, el desarme nuclear, la no proliferación de las armas nucleares, los usos pacíficos de la energía nuclear, la paz y la seguridad de todas las naciones. Yo puedo decir sin falsas modestias que he cumplido con ese alto honor. Debo decirles que ustedes me han hecho notar la verdad de ese axioma que hemos escuchado aquí, que dice que Nueva York es la ciudad que nunca duerme. Yo lo cambiaría porque es la ciudad en que casi nunca se duerme. La última semana de negociación así lo ha comprobado por nuestras largas sesiones de trabajo nocturnas en busca de un lenguaje de consenso. Qué pena que el esfuerzo no haya tenido la utilidad buscada, sobre todo que es un esfuerzo que muchos países realizan verdaderamente con mucho sacrificio. Venir a Nueva York por un mes, dejando sus hogares, dejando sus misiones, pues no es fácil. Y lamentamos de que después de un mes de negociaciones no hayas podido alcanzar el consenso deseado. El texto que hoy no han aprobado 3 Estados partes siempre ha buscado cubrir con los puntos de vista y de interés de todas las partes. Es claro que ese texto de compromiso no podía ser recibido podía ser recibido como insuficiente para algunos y como débil para otros, pero sea como fuera, este fue nuestro mejor esfuerzo, dadas las posiciones tan divergentes de las distintas partes. También debo decirles que yo, en lo personal, hubiese deseado ver puntos de flexibilidad real que, sin afectar sus intereses nacionales, nos lleven a un documento más rico, más fuerte y, por lo tanto, más favorable para todas las partes del Tratado de No Proliferación Nuclear. Debería haber empezado estas palabras lamentando este desafortunado resultado. Sin embargo, en mi calidad de presidente de la Comisión Principal 1, pero sobre todo, dada mi perspectiva de experimentado diplomático en asuntos de desarme, me permito opinar que el éxito de esta conferencia de examen del 2015 no está en si logramos o no el consenso de un documento que nos haga salir a todos con una sonrisa de esta sala de la Asamblea General, el salón de baile más bonito e importante de las negociaciones diplomáticas internacionales, sino el éxito debe estar medido en que, a mi entender, tengan la seguridad de que con nuestras deliberaciones, las importantes deliberaciones y conversaciones en estos difíciles tiempos en que vivimos, hemos logrado traer de regreso al concierto mundial al más importante instrumento legalmente vinculante que tenemos sobre el desarme nuclear, la no proliferación de las armas nucleares y los usos pacíficos de la energía nuclear. Sus principios han sido protegidos y reforzados por la gran mayoría de esta Asamblea, pero no podemos dejar de preguntarnos cuáles serán las consecuencias de esta oportunidad perdida para que al celebrar los 20 años de su extensión indefinida el mundo no ha conseguido tener un consenso sobre un tema tan importante. Aunque en un documento no adoptado por consenso, el tratamiento que se ha dado a viejos o nuevos temas como las consecuencias humanitarias de las explosiones nucleares, el fortalecimiento del CTBT, el compromiso futuro y el promisorio futuro del FMCT, las seguridades negativas para todos los estados no nucleares, entre otros importantes temas, hacen que esta conferencia de examen haya tenido el éxito que se nos niega, pero que se merece y en estos tiempos de inseguridades internacionales. No puedo terminar estas palabras sin mencionar, con su permiso, señora Presidenta, un reconocimiento personal y especial a mi amigo, el doctor Tariq Rauf, por su permanente dedicación, su siempre oportuno consejo, su capacidad profesional y su siempre buena disposición para atender a veces a mis difíciles requerimientos en calidad de presidente.
Thank you.
No he terminado, señora, si me permite.
Pensaba que sí.
Muchas gracias. No encontraba la página. Y era una página muy importante porque se trata de los agradecimientos a usted, señora Presidenta. A usted porque ha liderado nuestras deliberaciones y ha sido un honor trabajar a su lado. También quiero felicitar y agradecer a la gran gestión realizada por el presidente del Subsidiary Body número 1 por sus esfuerzos comunes y delicados además, para lograr nuestros objetivos. También mi agradecimiento a los dos vicepresidentes por su apoyo. Al secretariado, siempre tan profesional y efectivo, a Tomás Markram y su grupo muy eficiente. Especiales agradecimientos finalmente a las intérpretes y a los oficiales de sala por sus incansables esfuerzos para atender los requerimientos de estas delegaciones. Le agradezco, señora Presidenta, por su paciencia. Gracias.
Thank you, but frankly, we're still very short in time. I hope that the next speakers will really do their best in order that we will be on time. And I just remind that we didn't yet adopt the report, and we should do it. Then I urge you, please, to be short as much as you can. Alors, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. First, we would like to join other colleagues in expressing our profound gratitude to you, the three distinguished chairs of the main committees and the subsidiary bodies, and the Secretariat for their excellent leadership and tireless effort in steering past 4 weeks of discussion in a constructive and efficient manner toward a positive outcome. It is regrettable, however, that the conference was not able to produce a final outcome document despite the determined effort of all delegations to find a common ground on important issues, including the conference on the establishment of a Middle East zone free of weapons of mass destruction, and to forge a path that would strengthen the NPT regime. Nevertheless, we continue to believe that the delegations gathered here today share the common goal to strengthen the implementation of the treaty. Though very much disappointed, we are still hopeful that eventually our differences can be bridged with greater enterprise and more time. Our collective deliberation over the last 4 weeks has not been meaningless. At least we have gained a deep understanding of each other's positions on which common ground can be pursued in the future. Additionally, we live with many lessons learned through this review conference on which to build future success. In this regard, the Republic of Korea will continue to play its own part by faithfully implementing the treaty, and it is committed to working together with other state parties towards a safe and more peaceful world. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much. The next 4 speakers are Tunisia, Morocco, Palau, Switzerland. I give the floor now to the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. لقد قمت بمداخلة بداية أشغال الاجتماع الأعرابي عن استعداد المجموعة العربية للتماشي مع التوافق العام الذي كنا نطمح إلى تحقيقه على أساس الوثيقة التي قدمتموها. واسمحوا لي أن أتدخل مرة أخرى وبعد تعليق الأشغال باسم المجموعة العربية الإعراب عن خيبة أملنا العميقة إزاء عدم إحراز أي تقدم خلال مؤتمرنا لأسباب باتت معروفة لدينا جميعا. لقد سعدت الدول العربية إدراكا منها لخطورة الأسلحة النووية إلى بذل قصارى جهدها لتحقيق عالم خال من الأسلحة النووية، وانخرطت وظلت فاعلا رئيسيا في الجهود الدولية الرامية للتخلص الكامل والنهائي من تلك الأسلحة الفتاكة، وانطلاقا من إيمانها العميق بمدى الخطورة التي تمثلها الأسلحة النووية. سعت لمدة عقود لإخلال الشرق الأوسط من الأسلحة النووية، وأصرت على أن تشكل جهودها في هذا المضمار أحد الركائز الأساسية لرؤيتها لاستقرار وأمن المنطقة. وكانت الدول العربية تدرك جيدا أن مؤتمر المراجعة 2015 يمثل فرصة سانحة لتدارك التأخير في تنفيذ قرار 2015 واتخاذ خطوات عملية ملموسة، آملا في أن ينجح مؤتمرنا الحالي في تصحيح المسار والمضي قدما نحو التنفيذ الكامل لمقتضيات قرار 95. وهكذا يبقى مرة أخرى قرار 95 غير منفذ بسبب عدم توفر الإرادة السياسية اللازمة وعدم إيلاء الحيز الكافي من التشاور والحوار لأخذ المشاغل الأساسية لدول المنطقة في عين الاعتبار. النتائج مؤتمر المراجعة هذا تثير خيبة أمل وأحباط كبيرين لدى شعوب المنطقة، لأنها لا تستجيب لتطلعاتهم وانتظاراتهم، وهي شعوب كانت ولا تزال تطمح للعيش في سلام واستقرار وفي بيئة خالية من خطر الأسلحة النووية وباقي أسلحة دمار الشام. السيد الرئيس، أود في النهاية أن أنوه بالجهود الكبيرة التي بذلتموها بالكفاءة والاقتدار في إدارة أعمال المؤتمر، وكما أود أن أعبر عن شكرنا وامتناننا للعمل الذي تولى القيام به طيلة مدة مؤتمر المراجعة رؤساء اللجان الرئيسية الفرعية الثلاث والأمانة. وشكرا.
شكرا جزيلا، شكرا على الكلمة التي وجهتهم لي. وأما الآن أعطي الكلمة للممثل الموقر للمغرب.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Je voudrais de prime abord souligner les efforts que vous avez déployés dans la conduite de nos travaux. Le Maroc s'associe aux déclarations faites par l'Autriche, les groupes arabes et africains et souhaite faire les commentaires suivants. Nous sommes conscients des difficultés de parvenir à un document final qui prendrait en considération les inquiétudes de toutes les délégations. La délégation du Royaume du Maroc avait l'espoir que notre conférence parvienne à un document final équilibré qui répondrait aux aspirations de l'ensemble des États partis. Cependant, force est de constater que le projet proposé a sacrifié les mesures agréées lors des conférences de 2000 et de 2010. C'est une source de déception de ma délégation. Ce résultat décevant est l'aboutissement d'une démarche entachée des anomalies suivantes. L'absence de transparence dans le processus de négociation ainsi que son caractère sélectif et non inclusif. La partie des armements nucléaires est un recul flagrant par rapport aux engagements et décisions adoptés lors des conférences d'examen de 2000 et de 2010. Le langage sur l'impact humanitaire des armes nucléaires ne reflète pas le soutien dont jouit cette initiative. La section relative à la zone exempte d'armes nucléaires et autres armes de destruction massive au Moyen-Orient ne reflète pas un engagement clair pour la tenue de la conférence sur la question. À cet égard, je voudrais souligner que pour le Royaume du Maroc, tout en restant engagé pour l'établissement de la zone exempte d'armes nucléaires et autres armes de destruction massive au Moyen-Orient, considère que la résolution de 1995 et la décision de 2010 demeurent la référence pour son établissement. Enfin, le Maroc réitère son engagement pour les objectifs du TNP avec ses trois piliers, instrument fondamental de l'architecture de désarmement et de maintien de la paix et de la sécurité internationale. Je vous remercie.
Je vous remercie pour cette évaluation très déséquilibrée. Et je donne maintenant la parole au distingué représentant de Palau.
Thank you, Madam President. Palau associates itself with the statement delivered by the distinguished ambassador of Austria. We join all members in thanking you and the members of the Bureau for the professional and tireless efforts to achieve the outcome we so desired from this review conference. As party to the treaty, to this treaty, with an equal stake in achieving its full implementation, Palau is deeply disappointed at the slow pace of nuclear disarmament and the lack of consensus here on pathway forward. 4.5 decades have passed since the treaty entered into force, and yet the world remains at the brink of nuclear catastrophe, threatening all that we love and cherish. For many of us in the Pacific, this is also a deeply personal mission, as we have experienced firsthand the utter devastation wrought by these monstrous instruments of war. Without our consultation or consent, over the course of half a century, our region suffered from more than 300 nuclear test explosions. Even today, we are within striking distance from nuclear warheads from unfriendly nations. We believe that the voices of survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the survivors of the nuclear tests in the Pacific, and those of us at risk of annihilation from nuclear weapons today must never be ignored, marginalized, put aside, or forgotten. Madam President, Palau is pleased to join the more than 100 nations that have pledged their full active support for diplomatic process to negotiate a treaty to fill the legal gap for the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons. It is time to end the diversion of vast resources into the machinery of nuclear war, when such resources are so desperately needed to ensure the success of post-2015 Sustainable Development Agenda, and for us in the Pacific, so desperately needed for addressing climate change impacts and challenges. We are not content to remain an unwitting victims of others' disregard. The humanitarian pledge represented in this review conference provides a strong foundation from which to launch negotiations on a treaty banning nuclear weapons. It is, in essence, the outcome document for this conference. If we are to succeed in averting a nuclear catastrophe, we must work urgently together to fill the legal gap. Let the end of this conference mark the beginning of the end of nuclear age. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Ambassador Benno Lagner to take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. We deeply regret the absence of consensus on the draft final document that you have submitted to this review conference. The result of this conference constitutes a missed opportunity to take forward implementation of the 3 pillars of the NPT. It also does not advance efforts towards the establishment of a Middle East WMD-free zone. In this context, please allow me to place on record our appreciation for the efforts of the facilitator, Ambassador Layeva, and of his team. This outcome does not change a basic fact. Obligations under the treaty, as well as commitments entered into at successive review conferences, remain fully valid. Efforts to implement them should continue and be accelerated. The issue of the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of the use of nuclear weapons has marked this review conference. It will remain a central driver in our efforts in the years to come. Madam President, before concluding, I would like to thank you personally and your entire team for the tireless efforts, leadership, and great commitment. I would also like to thank the Chairman of Main Committee 1 for his kind words and for our excellent cooperation. Finally, I would also like to express our sincere appreciation for the excellent support of the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Benno, for your very kind words. I appreciate. The 5 next speakers in my list are Poland, Netherlands, Sweden, South Africa, France. I give the floor now to the distinguished representative of Poland.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Poland, acting as an Eastern European NPT coordinator, wishes to express on behalf of the group our sincere thanks to you, Madam President, for your dedication, tireless passion, diplomatic skills, and your firm trust in the value of NPT and in a positive outcome of our work you presented during the course of the conference as well as long before its commencement. We also wish to thank the chairs of main committees and subsidiary bodies for the tireless and immense work they have done throughout the last month. In particular, we also thank Mr. Tom Markram, Secretary of the Conference, for his benediction work and patience. We thank also the interpreters and all conference services, without whom we wouldn't be able to pursue our deliberation during the course of the last 4 weeks. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Poland. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 5 years ago, the Netherlands joined the NPDI to help implement the Action Plan of 2010 and to jointly work for a good outcome of this review conference. We feel that in this conference over the last week, progress seemed achievable on issues across all 3 pillars. Of course, like everyone else, we were not satisfied with every turn and phrase in the document, but important and useful elements were identified on disarmament, non-proliferation and peaceful uses. Also, we would have very much liked to have seen the continuation of an inclusive process on the Middle East zone, contributing to the security of all in the region and consolidating and building on the hard work done so far. Madam Chair, like others, my country deeply regrets that it wasn't possible to get consensus on an outcome document. Before I finish, allow me a few words of thanks. First of all, to you, Madam Chair, personally, for your tireless efforts. And also a big thank you to all the chairs of the main committees and the subsidiary bodies, the facilitators, and all the UN staff for their work. I would also like to mention and thank Ms. Angela Kane, the High Representative, who today is having her last day in office, for her commitment to disarmament. Finally, I would like to say to all delegations here that the Netherlands remains committed to strengthening the treaty and that we are ready to engage and work with all of you to achieve our common objective, a world free of nuclear weapons, where nuclear energy is exclusively used for peaceful uses only. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for your kind words. And now I give the floor to the representative of Sweden.
Thank you, Madam President. Sweden thanks you, Ambassadors Roman Murray, Lagner, Istrate, Moro and Stewart, their teams in the Secretariat for their tireless efforts and excellent work in trying to reach consensus. We regret that consensus could not be achieved. It would have been of particular importance in light of the current severe security environment and with the increased risk that nuclear weapons could be used by accident, miscalculation or design, with catastrophic consequences for humans and the sustainable environment that accompany any use of nuclear weapons. The NPT regime remains the cornerstone of nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation and the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, and a key instrument for international peace and security. Its vital role cannot be questioned through a failure to reach consensus. Madam President, the current security environment makes the humanitarian perspective, the recognition of risk reduction, nuclear disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation all the more important. It is in the interest of the very survival of humanity that nuclear weapons are never used again under any circumstances, and it is essential that all states at all times comply with applicable international law, including international humanitarian law. We look forward to working with partners to take this work forward through all possible routes and channels, inside and outside the UN system, in ways that are inclusive, structured and effective, and that ensure that substantive results can be achieved. This will strengthen and implement the NPT and will deal with the real security challenges of today. Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Madam
for
President.
your kind words. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Permit me to begin by thanking you for the sterling leadership you've provided with perseverance and resilience to ensure that we reach a conclusion that we're all proud of. We as Africans are very proud of you. You've done us very proud. We're also grateful to the Secretariat, the chairs of the committees and subsidiary committees for the work that they've done in supporting us to reach where we are. My delegation, South Africa, came here with high expectations because as a country that drew back voluntarily and dismantled its capability, we always think nothing is impossible. Indeed, President Mandela used to say to us, it always seems impossible until it is done. So we hoped somehow we would conclude on a hopeful note and on a high note. However, we were not able to do so. It is not as if what non-nuclear weapon states are asking for is too much or non-achievable. It is. What is at issue here, we feel, is the lack of moral courage and moral mettle in a context where non-nuclear weapon states continue to give and give and give. And there is lack of movement in critical areas that are important for the global citizenry. So, as we go home, we are at a loss for words as to how we will explain to the people of South Africa that we could not advance our work on the humanitarian impact. In essence, telling the world that we couldn't be bothered really what is likely to happen should a nuclear device be detonated. We really couldn't care. This is the message that we're sending to global humanity. I would expect that they would expect of us to require nothing of them. Because when we say this, we really do not have any moral right or standing to demand anything of anybody. If we say we cannot put something in place that will help us deal with the potential impact of the detonation of nuclear weapons. Equally, I'm at a loss for words to explain why increasingly the NPT is resting on one leg with the others becoming thinner and thinner and nearly at breaking point, in particular on nuclear disarmament. Because the legitimacy of the treaty becomes difficult to explain to the ordinary citizens, yet we all need it. It's not enough to simply state that the NPT was never intended to entail or to translate into the indefinite possession of nuclear weapons. It is important that the necessary steps are taken to ensure that there is progress that is anchored by a program and a legal path, as it were. On so many fronts where progress was expected, it wasn't accomplished. There is a sense in which the NPT is degenerated into a minority rule, similar to what we had in South Africa under apartheid. The will of the few will prevail regardless of whether it makes moral sense. Leaders can urge us all to act as citizens of the world. For as long as appeals are not backed up by the courage to lead by example, calls to us to disarm further do not make any sense anymore. It is very disappointing, Madam, that we've not been able to move on the Middle East. There's been no agreement on the Middle East as a zone free of all weapons of mass destruction. This was a decision taken in 1995 and was only activated again in 2010, and today all progress has been blocked. It will be inexplicable to my citizens at home to explain how we came to this point in a context where the Middle East is contiguous to the African nuclear weapon-free zone, as per the Pelindaba. And so we continue as Africans, as non-nuclear weapon states, giving more and more in a context where in significant areas there is no movement. Perhaps I should finish off by saying the failure on the Middle East leaves us with a perverse situation where a state party, a state that is outside of the treaty, has expectations of us and expects us to play by rules it will not play by, and be subjected to scrutiny it will not subject itself to. With consequences for us as developing countries, particularly when it comes to measures that are taken that affect our economies. We will continue, Madam Chair, as South Africa. We believe that it is possible, however bleak situations may be, and however impossible it may seem, somehow progress when those that have the moral courage to work together is attainable. So we look forward to working with delegations that are committed to the three pillars on which this treaty is founded to move it somehow. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam, for your very moving speech, and also for the very kind words directed to me and to the team that worked during this conference. Thank you so much. The last speaker is the distinguished representative of France. Please, you have the floor.
Madame la Présidente, je tiens à vous remercier personnellement et chaleureusement pour la façon dont vous avez conduit nos travaux, pour la façon dont vous avez conduit ces débats tout au long de ces 4 semaines de la conférence d'examen. Votre tâche était très difficile, sans doute l'une des plus difficiles de toute la diplomatie multilatérale, car elle mêle des enjeux de nature très diverse et néanmoins des enjeux imbriqués les uns avec les autres. Vous vous en êtes acquittés avec un grand professionnalisme, avec une disponibilité de tous les instants, une grande capacité d'écoute et une impartialité que je tiens à saluer ce soir. Je tiens également à remercier les présidents de nos grandes commissions et de nos organes subsidiaires et toute votre équipe, tous vos collaborateurs et collaboratrices. Alors, ce soir, nous ne sommes pas parvenus à un consensus. Nous ne devons pas nous décourager. Le plan d'action que nous avons adopté en 2010 est une feuille de route de long terme, c'est une feuille de route ambitieuse. La France reste engagée à mettre en œuvre cette feuille de route. La France a un bilan exemplaire en matière de désarmement nucléaire. Elle continuera d'agir à travers des mesures pragmatiques et réalistes. La France tient ce soir à rappeler et à réaffirmer son engagement à progresser au cours du prochain cycle d'examen dans la mise en œuvre des mesures prévues par le plan d'action de 2010, dans chacun de ces 3 piliers, la non-prolifération nucléaire, la promotion des usages pacifiques de l'énergie nucléaire et le désarmement. La France continuera à travailler pour le renforcement du traité qui demeure un élément irremplaçable de notre sécurité collective.
Madame la Présidente, je vous remercie.
Je vous remercie pour vos très aimables paroles. Merci. And now, I propose that we turn to the adoption of procedural report. Turning to the organization and work of the conference as contained in document NPT-Conf 2015 R2, I suggest we move section by section. The section entitled Introduction contains terms of reference of the conference and concise information concerning the preparatory committee. May I take it that the conference wishes to adopt the section entitled Introduction? Okay? Alors, adopted. The section on organization of the conference records proceedings of the opening of the conference, including inter alia elections of the officers of the conference, officers and members of the committees, and statements by the Secretary General of the United Nations and the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. It also records the adoption of the agenda, allocation of items to the three main committees, and establishment of the subsidiary bodies under the main committees. May I take it that the conference wishes to adopt section entitled Organization of the Conference? I see it is the case. Adopted. The section entitled Participation in the Conference provides a list of 161 state parties participating in the conference and observers, as well as general information on attendance of non-governmental organizations. May I take it that the conference wishes to adopt this section? I see it is the case. Now I invite you to consider the section entitled Financial Arrangements that records the adoption earlier today of the cost-sharing formula as contained in document NPT-Conf 2010/47. May I take it that the conference wishes to adopt this section on financial arrangements? I think it is the case. Adopted. Alors, the section entitled Work of the Conference. This section refers to plenary meetings of the conference, the work of main committees, as well as of the Credentials Committee. May I take it that the conference wishes to adopt this section, Work of the Conference? Yes. Adopted. On documentation. This one-paragraph section refers to the list of the documents of the conference and the text thereof. The documents of the conference will be issued as part 3 of the final document. I would like to emphasize that all the documents submitted before the end of the conference will be issued and included in the final document of the conference. May I take it that the conference wishes to adopt section entitled Documentation? Yes. Alors, it is the case. Conclusions of the conference. I propose that the wording of this section, will read as follows. Despite intensive efforts, the conference was unable to adopt the draft final document as contained in document NPT-Conf 2015 R3. May I take it that the conference wishes to adopt the section entitled Conclusions of the Conference? Of course. Voilà. Alors, I wish before... This is true? Oui, sorry. There is another section that I forget. May I take it that the conference wishes to adopt its final document as a whole? Okay? No. Adopted. Before I adjourn, I wish to express my deep appreciation to the chairman of the main committees, Ambassador Enrique Roman Morey of Peru, Ambassador Cristian Istrate of Romania, and Ambassador David Stewart of Australia, and the two chairmen of Subsidiary Body 1, Ambassador Benno Lagner of Switzerland, and subsidiary body 2, Mr. Juan Ignacio Moro Villasian of Spain, and subsidiary body 3, Ambassador Khairat Abratkamanov of Kazakhstan, as well as to the chair of the drafting committee, Ambassador Vladimir Dromyak of Croatia, and to the chairman of the credentials committee, Ambassador Mohammed Al-Hakim of Iraq, for the commitment and diligence with which they performed their respective functions. My gratitude also goes to all members of the General Committee and to all those that facilitated various aspects of our consultations. I would like also to thank the Secretary General of the Conference, the staff of the Secretariat of the Conference, the interpreters, the conference services, conference room officers and document officers, security officers and translators, and the many more Secretariat staff working behind the scenes to assist us during our work. Their patience and cooperation were much appreciated. Finally, I wish to express my deep gratitude to my authorities for the confidence they placed on me. And I seize also this excellent opportunity to express my deep appreciation and thanks to the team, the Algerian team. They assisted me in a very efficient way, and I wanted really to appreciate their dedication and professionalism throughout this conference. Alors, having said that, thanks all. Alors, I now declare the 2015 Review Conference of the Parties to the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons closed. The meeting is adjourned. Enfin, closed. Voilà.
Wrap it up because we were out of time.
Yeah.
Thank you for everything.
No, it's okay. Please, may I have your attention that EU wishes to deliver a statement. Since we still have room for them to speak, I will be very happy to give them the floor. Then I'm sorry that I will keep you seated for a while, for a short while, that we hear the speech by the distinguished representative of the European Union. Please, you have the floor. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Well, thank you, Madam President. I simply requested the floor to thank you on behalf of myself and my colleagues from the European External Action Service. Thank you for your tireless efforts throughout this conference, stretching until its very last moments, as well as to the commendable work of the chairpersons of the main committees and the subsidiary bodies, Conference Secretariat, the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs, the interpreters and all involved conference services. I did wanted to say, Madam President, that as the EU High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy, Madam Federica Mogherini declared in the general debate of this review conference, the European Union remains united in regarding the NPT as the cornerstone of the global nuclear non-proliferation regime, the essential foundation for the pursuit of nuclear disarmament in accordance with Article 6 of the NPT, and an important element in the further development of nuclear energy applications for peaceful purposes. In accordance with its policy of effective multilateralism, the EU is committed to upholding and preserving the NPT as a key priority and as a multilateral instrument for maintaining and reinforcing international peace, security and stability. Bearing in mind the current severe security environment, we reiterate our unwavering support for all the three pillars of the treaty and to the implementation of all commitments assumed under it or undertaken during previous review conferences. I thank you, Madam President.
Sorry, thank you. Meeting is closed.